We are picking up with Anne Bradstreet's author tour book on what page is that? 692 in the 11th edition. 869 in the 10th edition. We left off at line 18, 15, 16, 17, 18, where she writes, but not save homespun cloth in the house I find. Talking, continuing the metaphor of the poems and book as her children/child. I wanted to send you off in better dress, but she says, all I have is homespun cloth. And I alluded to or suggested the other day, that's because what she's getting at is all she writes about in all of her poems, everyday, ordinary things that a New England Puritan woman would be familiar with. Husband, children, house, chores, gardening, farming, etc. Her house burns down, she writes about it. Her house did burn down. I'm not saying if. Her house did burn down. She writes about it. She describes what happened. She describes people trying to put out the fire, etc., etc. I'm pretty sure, I've not read her collection in literally decades. I'm almost positive she has poems about her husband's death. She has poems about some of her children's deaths. Okay? So that's what she's talking about there. But not save homespun in the cloth in the house I find. In this array, talking about everyday, ordinary, common things, amongst vulgars mayst thou roam. Vulgars, couple of different meanings. One, common, ordinary, everyday folks. But I think it also implies people unknown to me. Okay? In critics' hands, beware thou dost not come. And I believe I alluded to, might not have been this class, might have been my first class, literary critics, English professors, so to speak. Don't let them read you. Why? Because they're going to pick at it. They're going to find fault with it. And if, take thy way where yet thou art not known, that is, leave here, her town, go somewhere else. And if thy father asks, say thou hadst none, you didn't have a father, that is, nobody inspired these ideas into her. And for thy mother, she alas is poor, which caused her thus to send thee out of door. What does that last line imply? It's actually more than implying it.
She's selling her manuscript for money.
She needs to generate income. If, as I'm pretty sure, her husband died, how is she going to take care of herself and her remaining children? Okay. Notice her birth and death dates. Her death date 1672. This poem's published 1678. That's not going to help her if it's not published until then. Anyways, I don't remember the exact details of the publication of the American first edition. It might be 1678. There might have been an earlier one. Okay. Turn from there to, is that right? 704. John Donne, Valediction Forbidding Mourning. A little bit about John Donne. And I'm only doing this because my dissertation was on Donne. I like to spend a few minutes because most people don't know anything about him. Born 1572, dies 1631, so 28, 31, 59 years old. Shortly before his death, he knows he's dying. He poses for an effigy. That is, he lies down naked except for covered by a burial shroud. Okay? And a guy does a drawing of it and then makes a carving of that. You can see that same carving if you go to St. Paul's Cathedral in London today. Donne did that because he was the dean of St. Paul's Cathedral. That is the highest ranking individual at the cathedral. He kind of ran the show, so to speak, back up to before that time period. Early life, he was a soldier. He was a kind of a jack about town, meaning he got around a lot. People knew, about him. He was fairly popular with the ladies, you could say. He was writing poetry by his early 20s. He may have attended university. We don't know for sure. There's no actual record of it. His family is all Catholic. His wife's family, back a little ways, is also Catholic. Okay? He had an uncle who I'm pretty sure, really ought to double check this, was executed for being a Catholic priest. He had a brother who was in prison for being a Catholic priest. Late period, Elizabethan period, under Elizabeth I's reign, she got really staunchly anti-Catholic. I'm not saying she was staunchly Protestant. She was anti-Catholic because the Catholics tried to invade and overthrow her, Catholics of Spain. In Northern Catholics, she had them brutally put down, okay? So there's this, whole Catholic background. In the late 1590s, Donne goes to work for a man named Thomas Egerton, okay? Who is his position in the government is Lord Keeper of the Seal. Seal is a big round thing that's inscribed, has an image on it. It is used when Queen Elizabeth, later King James, needs to have official documents sealed with the seal of the kingdom or the realm. Wax is put down and this thing is pushed into the wax, all right? Egerton is in possession of that. So wherever the queen goes and needs this thing, he's with her. It's a very, very high-ranking position, all right? Donne goes to work for him as his personal secretary. Personal secretary means you handle all the correspondence for that person. Not you take dictation means you answer in that person's voice, all right? By this time, this is like 1598, Donne had already been elected once as member of parliament. So his trajectory in society was just headed upwards. He was popular. Shakespeare knew him. Ben Jonson knew him. Ben Jonson has poems to him, etc., and is jealous of Donne's abilities, things like that. While he's working for Egerton, he meets a young girl named Anne Moore. Okay? He goes to work for Egerton in 1598. So Donne's 26. He meets this young girl, 14, named Anne Moore. They get married in 3 years. So he's 29, she's 17. They get married secretly. Her uncle, who is Thomas Egerton, the keeper of the seal, doesn't know. Her father, Thomas More, not the Thomas More who becomes a saint in the Catholic Church, who defied Henry VIII. That guy was a good 80 years earlier. 60 years earlier. Her father is very upset when he finds out. Her uncle is very upset when he finds out. A couple of things happen. One, Donne is immediately fired. Two, her father has him put in prison. Why? Because you have to get the father's permission, especially when you're talking to a Sir Thomas More, which he was. He's put in prison, if I remember right, for about 4 months. So that's 4 months that he can't do anything really, and it's 4 months that his wife is kind of on her own because her father kind of writes her out, so to speak. temporarily at least. Interestingly, a bunch of letters from Moore to Donne and Donne to Moore survive, and they're in the Folger Shakespeare Library in Washington, D.C. And by the time the last of these letters is written, they're getting along fairly well. So it's probably not in that 4-month time period. So, she's pregnant. They're going to be married for about 16, 17 years. She dies in 1617. Pretty young. 31 years old, if I remember correctly. Something like that, 31, 34. In the 17 years they were married, she had 12 children. That's more than one every 18 months, okay? 4 of them, 5 of them, don't survive outside infancy. I think 2 of them are stillborn. The poem that we're going to read, according to Isaac Walton, a friend of Donne's and his first biographer, Walton tells us this poem was written upon an occasion, okay, where Donne was working for a man named Robert Drury, Sir Robert Drury, was working as his kind of personal secretary again, and he had to go on a trip to the continent with Drury. Anne didn't want him to. Your poem's dated 1611. The date is based upon 2 things. It's not based upon publication date, and it's not dated upon a manuscript that has the date. It's dated upon what Isaac Walton says, okay, in his biography, and because of some of the content. Some of the content indicates it has to be written after 1610, all right? And what Walton says is that Anne Donne had a premonition that if John Donne goes on this trip, something bad is going to happen. And it did. That was one of her stillborn deliveries. Okay? She wanted to go with him. And apparently he said no. All right? Couple other things. In 1615, Donne takes what are called holy orders, becomes an Anglican priest. So, turns his back on the Catholic Church. To some extent, he does write a variety of poems later, religious poems, where he still firmly believes in the saints and prayers to saints, and Mary is the Blessed Virgin Mary, etc., which isn't entirely within some that's not entirely within Anglican tradition. One other thing. When King James VI of Scotland becomes King James I of England, he gets this wild hair that he's going to have Donne become his personal royal priest. He's not a priest at the time. Anglican priest, okay? And because he has that idea, imagine this door as opportunities for Donne. James just keeps slamming it closed. Donne gets an opportunity because he wants to box him into. So even though, he's allowed to become like a personal secretary, there's not a lot of good pay in that. Donne's family is pretty much scraping to get by until 1615, and he becomes Anglican priest. He starts delivering sermons privately to King James, etc. 1623, he becomes what's called the Dean of St. Paul's Cathedral. That St. Paul's Cathedral is not the St. Paul's that you would see today if you go to London. Go to London, get on the Millennium Bridge on the south bank of the Thames. To your right, a couple hundred yards away, is going to be Shakespeare's Globe. Walk across the Millennium Bridge, and about 300 or 400 yards from the end of the bridge, maybe a little bit more than that, St. Paul's Cathedral. Big dome, massive dome. That's all new. Well, 18th century. New. The original St. Paul's Cathedral was all wood. It burned down along with most of London in the Great Fire of 1666. Okay? Which is why there are very few buildings, for example, from Shakespeare's day that survive. There are some. You have to kind of look for them, but there are a few. So, all that's prefaced to, one other thing. By the turn of 1700, okay, Donne dies in 1631. So, 69 years later, by around the turn of 1700, Donne is not read for his poetry. He's read for his sermons. His sermons number in the hundreds. Okay? And from like late 17th century, 1660s, 1670s, until the early 20th century, he's primarily only known for his sermons. His sermons, some of which could take 3-5 hours to deliver. They weren't written to be read. They were written to be delivered. And when Donne would deliver a sermon at St. Paul's, he wouldn't do it every Sunday, kind of have a rotation. He would pack it. People came just to hear his sermons. And again, some of these were standing room only, 3 hours long, because they wanted to hear the mental gymnastics that he would produce, or the mental fireworks, the intellectual fireworks. So they'd sit there and go, damn, how did he come up with that image? It's what he's known for, all right? Donne's the founder of what's called the metaphysical school of poetry, or metaphysical poetry. The term metaphysical is created after Donne by, I think it is John Dryden. Dryden uses that term derogatorily. And he says, Donne, teases women's minds with these metaphysical images. Metaphysical just means the beingness of things. And he creates what are called metaphysical conceits. A conceit is an idea. That's all it is. Metaphysical conceits are linkages together of wildly dissimilar things. The first person who uses that term says it is a violent yoking together of dissimilar things. I wish it used to be in this book. Editor is taking it out to add something else. Look up Donne's The Flea. It's a fairly short poem, 1829, something like that, where Donne links together love with a flea. Sexual, romantic, erotic, marital love with a flea. And disgusting, kind of. Pregnancy with a flea. Possibly pregnancy, okay? The marriage bed with a flea. Ew, right? Okay? He's doing something there. Look at it. It's not in our book. He's going to have several metaphysical conceits in this poem. So, yeah, we can start. As virtuous men pass mildly away, let me back up. A valediction forbidding mourning. What's valediction mean? How many of you graduated high school and had to listen to a valedictory address by the valedictorian? How many of you had more than one valedictorian? My kids, a couple of my kids, when they graduated, I'm not kidding, one of those classes, I think they had like 20 or 22. And every stinking one of them got to give a speech. It was like a 3.5-hour grad. It's longer than MTSU's May graduation. I mean, it's like 3.5, 4 hours. And they all pretty much said the same useless stuff. What's a valedictory speech? What do they do? First, I shouldn't go there because we don't have time. How many valedictorians should there be? There should be one. It should be the number one student. But principals are like, well, how do you decide when Johnny and Susie and Laura all have a 4.0 or higher GPA? They all did. Athletics, student government, art, blah, blah. Saved babies, saved children, saved the whales. Pick one. Just, my own little soapbox. A valediction, vale means goodbye. literally Latin for see you later. Diction, speech. It's a goodbye speech. What's the most famous? Oh man, I could almost say this. Valedictory speech in the history of the world. Okay, maybe that's a little too much. In the United States. Nope. Close. It is a president. George Washington. His farewell address. His farewell address and his not running for a third term caused George III, who the United States rebelled against, to say, he's the greatest man who ever lived, because he willfully, of his own free will, gave up all the power. He turned his back on it. Okay? Read his valedictory address, his farewell address, by the way. If we'd only listened to George Washington, we would not be in the state we are now, or have been for the last, he gave that in 1796, 227 years. Because Jefferson didn't listen, and Adams didn't listen, and we wouldn't have Democrats and Republicans if we had listened to Washington. So, this is a valediction. Donne wrote 3 of these, by the way. A valediction forbidding mourning, a valediction of weeping, and a valediction of, what's the third one? My name in a window. What? There is actually, someone's discovered it, I don't remember where. There's actually a piece of glass that has Donne's name scratched on it. And it's thought to be by Donne. And it's possible, reference for that poem. So this is a valediction forbidding mourning. Don't cry. Don't weep. Don't sorrow. And again, according to Walton, this is written when Donne has to leave his wife and she says, don't go. As virtuous men pass mildly away and whisper to their souls to go, while some of their friends, sins, or sad friends do say, the breath goes now and some say no. So how do virtuous men die? Silently. You don't know. You're sitting there, you're all gathered around the deathbed, because that was the practice at the time. We have this fear of death, so people say, put them away in a cubicle, let them die on their own, convalescent home, etc. And you're sitting there around the body and going, is he dead? I don't know. Get a mirror, So let us melt. First 2 stanzas, simile, as so. So let us melt and make no noise, no tear floods nor sigh tempest move. 'Twere profanation of our joys to tell the laity our love. They would have rhymed Donne's day. So what does that mean, so let us melt? What happens when Christian tradition? What happens when you die? Jewish tradition, Muslim tradition also, by the way. The soul leaves the body, right? So you have the soul and the body. They melt, they separate. So let us separate, melt, and make no noise. Just as the virtuous men die silently, we should separate silently. No tear floods, nor sigh tempests. These are what are called Petrarchan conventions. This is discussed somewhere in the introduction to poetic terms and such. Okay? Petrarch, Italian poet, who wrote about love, who wrote about his love for a woman named Laura, who he never spoke to. My daughters would say, stalker, kind of a thing. And he creates these images that get followed and abused almost, overdone. And some of the images are, if the beloved, the person that he loves, frowns at him, that causes him great sorrow. So what does he do? He cries, and his tears produce floods. Or he sighs, and his sighs become hurricanes that destroy the world. So, no tear floods nor side tempests move. 'Twere profanation of our joys to tell the laity our love. Two words there tell us there's a religious context. Profanation, to make something profane, because you only have something profane or profaneness exist in connection with its opposite, the sacred, the holy. 'Twere profanation of our joys to tell the laity our love. Anybody know what laity is? If this were a church, okay, or synagogue, I don't know about mosque because I'm not familiar with the behavior in mosque, but in a church or a synagogue, what would I be? Standing up here talking, teaching, preacher, pastor, priest, rabbi, okay? What would all of you be? The laity. Why? Preacher, pastor, priest, rabbi, etc. is what? Initiated into the deeper mysteries, ordained, set aside, set apart to do the training and such. Okay? The laity are the people who receive the training, the teaching, within the Christian tradition, the Eucharist, the communion meal, all that which is done by the priest, pastor, minister, etc. So the speaker says it would make our joys profane to tell the laity our love. Who's the laity? And who's the our? Well, the our has to be, very least, the speaker, right? And the person being addressed. The laity, everybody else. So the speaker and the person being addressed are the, so to speak, clergy, the initiates into our love. The people out there aren't, because they're not doing, threesomes and orgies and all that kind of stuff. It's just the two. And he says it would do what to our joys? It would dirty them. It would make them profane. It would make them less holy to tell everybody else about our love. See, that passage, to me, that's an indicator that this isn't written about Donne's getting ready to go to the continent and leave his wife behind. Because everybody who knows John Donne and Anne Donne knows they're married. It wouldn't be a profanation of their joys. But if their marriage was still secret and he had to leave and she acts all distraught because he's leaving, what could that be an indicator of? Oh, there's more than just a friendship there. That would profane their joys. And some of his poems are clearly written about indicating their secret relationship. I mean, it's just crystal clear, okay? Some of the songs and sonnets. So, new image. Moving of the earth brings harms and fears. Men reckon what it did and meant. But trepidation of the spheres, though greater far, is innocent. Okay? Moving of the earth. There was one a couple of months ago. Turkey and Syria. An earthquake. Whenever there's a major earthquake, the one in Turkey and Syria was pretty bad. It was like a 7.2. It's not nearly as big as it can be. The one off Indonesia 10, 15 years ago, that was like a magnitude 9. It's huge. The Fukushima one was huge. That was 9.2, I think. Okay? If the fault off the coast of Oregon, Washington, Northern California, Vancouver rips, it's called the Cascadia Subduction Zone, it'll make every earthquake in our lifetimes seem like nothing. 50 miles from the coast inward will be covered by water. The tsunami will be so big. So he says, movement of the earth brings harms and fears, men reckon what it did and meant. Every time there's a major earthquake, you can get on the Drudge Report and you will find a link somewhere to an article about where is God? Why did God allow this to happen? That's what that means. What it meant. Why? Jesus tells about the end of the world. There will be earthquakes, fires, wars, famines. Is this the indication? Around the ring of fire, the Pacific coastlines of the continents, often, if there's a major earthquake in one spot, there will kind of be some ripples. So that's all down here. But trepidation of the spheres, though greater far, is innocent. And you've got a little gloss, but it doesn't give you enough. Trepidation of the spheres. The ancient conception of the universe. This is developed by a guy named Ptolemy, Greek mathematician, 150 BC. He said the universe is composed of the earth at the center, and it is surrounded by 9 spheres. So, think of my fist as the earth, put a clear ball around it, that's 1 sphere, 2, 3, 9 spheres. Outside that, the Middle Ages kind of adds this, Christian Middle Ages. Outside that is what's called the Empyrean, like empty space. That's where God dwells. God, according to Aristotle, is the unmoved mover. The primum mobile, it's also called the primum mobile in this system. God doesn't move. God is totally stationary. God is totally at rest. But God makes everything else move. And here's how that works, according to the Ptolemaic conception. God moves this sphere here. Okay? This sphere moves. And the movement of this sphere causes this sphere to move. You can see this in practice. Get in a swimming pool that the filter hasn't been running, like a round one, that the filter hasn't been moving so the water's still. Get on step in from the ladder, get right up next to the edge, and walk around the outside edge of the pool. And what happens? The water starts to move, and it moves, so that even eventually the water in the middle of the pool is moving. This movement causes this movement, causes this movement, but this one causes this to move, this causes this to move, this causes this to move, but it's not only this causing this, it's all 3 of these out here. Okay? Get down to earth. What does this mean? All of our lives down here are affected by the movement of the spheres, the stars, the planets, etc. That's the basis for astrology. What planet is ascendant? What planet is descendant? What star is rising? What star is falling? When you're born. And the hours within each of those. So you get the horoscope, you get the zodiac in the sky, Capricorn, all that kind of stuff. Which you can pick up the Tennessean or the Daily News Journal, and you can read those today for when you were born. Okay? Trepidation of the spheres, though greater far, that is, the movement of the spheres is greater than any movement down here on earth. Trepidation of them, which can mean movement, it can also mean what? Fear of is innocent. Why? Because in 1610, and this is one of the indications, one of the pieces of information that possibly helps date the poem, in 1610, Galileo published, and I can't remember the title, published his findings based upon his invention of the telescope, or his, maybe invention isn't the right word, his improvement of the telescope, that what Copernicus published in 1543 is correct. Copernicus said, the sun is the center. and the planets move around the sun. That gets then later expanded to, and the sun and the planets moving around it are also moving. Around what? The center of our galaxy. And it is moving. There is no quote unquote center, so to speak, so cosmologists tell us, of the universe. It's all expanding outward. Seems to me, if it's all expanding outward, somewhere there's got to be a center, but they say there isn't. Anyway, so heliocentric version, geocentric, Ptolemaic vision of the universe, and the Copernican, Galilean, Keplerian. I skipped Kepler, who's in there also. All right? So why does he bring this up? Dull, sublunary lovers love. Okay? Here's the Earth. Here's the moon in its orbit around the Earth. It was thought part of the Ptolemaic conception of the universe. Everything beneath the orbit of the moon was subject to change. Not only subject to change, did change. Always. Heraclitus said, all is in flux. You want to know the one constant of life? It's not death and taxes. It is everything changes. It's the impermanence of this life. Okay? So, dull, sublunary lovers love. That is love that is subject to change. Whose soul is sense. What does that mean, whose soul is sense? These kind of lovers, what makes up their love? Sensory perceptions. The five senses. Okay? Their love cannot admit absence, because it doth remove those things which elemented it. Right? If my wife were here, and this door were open, and we had a dull sublunary love, and I was here, and I was holding her, and she walked out of that door, the speaker here is saying, what would happen? The love? Gone. Why? Because the thing that created that love is what? Her physical being. Eyes, lips, nose, etc. That physical being is removed, and the thing that is the source of that love, poof, gone. It can't admit absence, because absence removes those things which elemented the atoms of that love. But we, who's the we? This clergy of love almost. These two who have a higher love. But we by a love so much refined that is outside this. Okay? So much purified that ourselves know not what it is. What's the correct answer if you're married, if you're engaged, if you're in love with somebody, etc.? What's the correct answer to, why do you love me? I'm going to rephrase that. What's the incorrect answer? Or an incorrect answer? Your body, your smile, your hair, your looks, your eyes, because what's going to happen to every single one of those? Down here. It changes. Okay? What is beautiful today, according to some of the poems we're going to read, we read that we've already read is going to be what tomorrow? Rotted, metaphorically. We don't know what our love. So the correct answer is, why do you love me? I can't put my finger on it. Because if you do say, it's your body, you're more than likely going to get slapped. For whichever sex, it doesn't matter. We, what? Enter assured of the mind. Care less, eyes, lips, and hands to miss. What does that enter assured of the mind mean? What is assured? What do you have if you have assurance? Not insurance. That's totally different. Assurance.
You know something's gonna happen.
You know something? Confidence? No doubt. No room for doubt. You have assurance. If I let go of this, what's going to happen?
It's gonna fall.
What would happen if it didn't fall? Every one of your minds there'd be brain all over the place. Mine would, at least. Because if I let go of this and it just hung there, I'd be, praying and running because something weird's happening. We enter assured. We have that no doubt. We have that confidence. What's the enter? Like interstate commerce, interstellar travel, intercourse, between. Their assurance is between minds. We what? We care less. Eyes, lips, or hands to miss. It doesn't matter that I'm here and my wife is at home right now. Or that I'm here and going to Europe and you stay here. Why? Because our two souls, therefore, which are one, why are they one? And the two shall become one. It doesn't just refer to sex. Though I must go, and finally we're told, the speaker has to leave. Endure not yet a breach, but an expansion, like gold to airy thinness beat. Why gold to airy thinness? What kind of metal is gold? Other than precious and valuable and all that kind of stuff. It is why he uses gold. Why not lead? Gold and lead are the same kind of metal. They're malleable. You can pound them both really, really, really thin. You can, literally, if you wanted to, nobody does because it's precious. You could pound gold so thin, you could use it like a window. It would have a goldish tint to see through it. But gold isn't, I can't remember the term. Gold isn't the kind of metal that breaks. I've got another ring I've mentioned before that I did something so the bottom of it here got all bent so I can't wear it anymore. I could take that ring and smack it with a hammer. It's not going to break. It'll just bend. So he says, our souls are like gold, beat to an airy thinness. It's just expanding. He didn't have them then. What image could we use for that today? Like a rubber band. And if Donne had a rubber band, I am 100% convinced he would have used it. Why? What happens when you stretch a rubber band? It comes back. If they be two, and I think between the previous stanza, our two souls therefore, and if they be two, the person hearing the poem does something like, come on, really? Our two souls are going to expand? Get out of here. Not, okay, let's say they're not two. They're not one. If they be two, they are two so as stiff twin compasses are two. And I meant to bring in a compass, and I always mean to bring in a compass and forget. What's he mean by compass? He's talking about the legs of a compass that you use to inscribe a circle or an arc. So he says they're like this. Thy soul, the fixed foot, this one, makes no show to move, but doth if the other do. So if I want to use these two markers as a compass, and I want to inscribe a circle, what do I have to do with one of the legs? Let's say this is the leg with a pencil lead in it, and this is the one with a point. You jam the point down, and then do what? You got to extend that. Is that going to draw a circle? It has to be what? It has to be on the same plane. So you have to tilt it so that this tip is on the same plane as this tip. What has just happened? This one did what? It leans. It leans in the direction that the other one is leaning. Or, to use the language of the poem, It leans and hearkens after it. It calls after it, so to speak. Okay? And though it, your soul, is a fixed foot, and though it in the center sit, in the center of what? It's going to be referred to. Yet when the other far doth roam, it leans and hearkens after it, and grows erect as this one comes back home. Okay? Such wilt thou be to me, who must, like the other foot, obliquely run. I have to run, move away from you. And you, bending towards me, will do what? Make my circle just. Just meaning perfect, complete. I have to leave, but as long as you stay here, I'll find my way home. This is what happens when I try to draw a circle without a compass. It doesn't meet. It's not perfect. Now, highly intellectual? Oh yeah. But that is a great love poem. Because the speaker is saying what? Trite phrase from the end of Jerry Maguire. You complete me. Without you staying here, I might go abroad and go astray. Okay? Turn from there to My Last Duchess, Robert Browning. One comment about Donne's poem, and then to link it to Browning. Some would call Donne's poem either an or having an apostrophe. I don't mean apostrophe like apostrophe S. I mean an apostrophe in the sense that it's a speech spoken to someone who's just out of view. Okay? That's one meaning of the word apostrophe. Pretty sure it's in your book. Browning's poem is a dramatic monologue. Dramatic. Okay? So it's like an acting out. But it's a monologue, not a dialogue. But it's similar to an apostrophe in that there is somebody else there. Okay? A difference between, I didn't point this out to my first class, I should have. A difference between the two is that in a dramatic monologue, the speaker betrays something about him or herself that they would probably want to keep hidden. That is, they reveal something that they probably shouldn't. Donne's speaker doesn't do anything like that. The speaker in this poem is definitely going to, okay? And if you're interested, I'm pretty sure it's on YouTube, there's a wonderful little performance of this poem, this dramatic monologue, by the British actor Julian Glover. And he's got to be in his, I don't know, early 30s, maybe early 40s. So it's a good 30 or 40 years old now. But it is just fantastic in his portrayal because he nails the betrayal of that part of his character. So, you got the little note about Ferrara. 16th century, Duke of this Italian city arranged to marry a second time after the mysterious death of his very young wife. And the Ferrara might be the name of the Duke. That is, the town might be named for the Duke. That's My Last Duchess. Imagine that bulletin board as the painting. That's My Last Duchess painted on the wall, looking as if she were alive. So we've just been told what? She's dead. By the way, what might last imply? Why not previous? Why not first? Last can imply. There's been more than one before her. She's just the last one. Okay? I call that piece a wonder now. Frau Pandolf's hands worked busily a day, and there she stands. Frau Pandolf isn't real, your gloss tells you that. So, Frau Pandolf worked a long time to produce this portrait. Will it please you sit and look at her? So, pulls beside the curtain, and they sit on seats. They're making their way downstairs, but apparently this is a landing, and there's this portrait. I said Frau Pandolf by design, for never read strangers like you that pictured countenance, the depth and passion of its earnest glance. But to myself they turned, since none puts by the curtain I have drawn for you but I, and seemed as they would ask me if they durst, how such a glance came there. So not the first are you to turn and ask thus. Notice, has the other person asked? Nope. The speaker is putting words into the other person's mouth based upon other people who have asked. So, what would they ask? How did you get that look? Like, man, it's so lifelike. It's that glance. Notice, she's not just staring straight out into space. It's almost like there's something more. He's going to tell us what the something more is. Sir, 'twas not her husband's presence only called that spot of joy into the Duchess's cheek. What's the spot of joy? Blushing? Perhaps Frau Pandolf chanced to say, her mantle laps over my lady's wrist too much, or paint must never hope to reproduce the faint half-flush that dies along her throat. Such stuff was courtesy, she thought, and cause enough for calling up that spot of joy. Now, the two things that he says, Frau Pandolf possibly said, her mantle laps over my lady's wrist too much, means what? Her mantle, something she wears over her shoulders, over her breast, is covering her arms. What is Frau Pandolf suggesting? Show me some skin. Apparently, 16th century Renaissance Italy, wrists are to be, kept covered. Or he says what? Something about the blush along her throat. Why would she blush along her throat? What is blush, redness of the skin, indicating? Physiologically, those capillaries, they're opening up. Why? The heart's pounding. Something's got her a little excited. Maybe it was one of these. And she would consider these statements to just be a sign of courtesy. She had a heart, how shall I say, too soon made glad, too easily impressed. She liked whatever she looked on, and her looks went everywhere. What does that mean? She liked whatever she looked on. Everything she looks at, she likes. She doesn't look at anything and go, ooh, that's bad, that's wrong, that's horrible, that's ugly, that's foul, that's... What does that tell us about her? Possibly. Louder? Optimistic. Innocent. She doesn't see bad in anything. And in one sense, very childlike. Okay? So her looks go everywhere, and she likes everything she sees. Sir, 'twas all one. Everything makes her happy. My favor at her breast, the dropping of the daylight in the west, a bough of cherries, some officious fool broke in the orchard for her, the white mule she rode with round the terrace. All and each would draw from her alike the approving speech or blush at least. He's just named 4 things. His favor at her breast. What does that mean? Doesn't mean he likes her breast. It means she's wearing something on her chest. It might be a brooch or brooch, depending on your pronunciation, on her gown. It might be a necklace with a gemstone. She likes that just as much as she likes the sunset. Just as much as she likes the stupid bowl of cherries some fool brings her. Just as much as she likes riding the white mule. What has he just told us? What might he have betrayed about himself? Is he innocent? What should she like more of those 4 things? Do you know how much money I paid for that jewel? She thanked men. Good. Good. Proper courtesy. But then, as if she ranked my gift a gift of a 900 years old name with anybody's gift. How do you give her a gift of a 900-year-old name? He allowed her to marry him. Okay? It's 10:05, so we'll have to stop. We will pick up with who'd stoop to blame. And we'll try to finish this quickly and pick up from there. Whether we discuss them or not, everything that's on the syllabus can show up on quizzes and or the final exam. More than likely, we won't end up discussing everything.